on street. What happened next shocked the entire police force. The sound of screeching tires sliced through the night as the black Maserati skidded to a stop beside the bleeding woman. The rain came down in sheets, washing streaks of crimson across the cracked asphalt. The man who stepped out didn't belong to this world of pain and mercy. Alessandro Romano, the most feared mafia boss on the East Coast, known for making men vanish and empires bend. Yet for the first time in years, his pulse skipped when he saw her face. A cop, a dying one, and not just any, Detective Aria Vale, the same officer who had sworn to bring him down. Her hand trembled against the pavement, blood pooling under her wrist. He crouched beside her, disbelief and fury flashing in his eyes. This wasn't supposed to happen. Not to her. Not like this. His men were frozen, watching in confusion as the most ruthless man in the city tore open his own jacket to stop her bleeding. She tried to speak, but her voice cracked, her breath rattled, and her eyes rolled back. That's when the anger hit him. Someone had done this. Someone who would pay. Fire before we go deeper. Tell me what is in your city right now. What's coming next will make your heart stop. Fire. The rain grew heavier, but Alessandro didn't move. He pressed his hand hard against the wound, his jaw clenched tight. His driver stammered, asking if they should call an ambulance. Alessandro's eyes snapped up, cold and sharp. No hospitals. No witnesses. He lifted her limp body into his arms, ignoring the blood soaking through his shirt. She was barely breathing, her head falling against his shoulder as he barked for the car. They sped through the city streets, tires cutting through puddles, lights blurring by. In the back seat, Alessandro's heartbeat thundered louder than the engine. Aria's face was pale, lashes heavy with rain and blood. He hated her once, for raiding his clubs, for putting his brother behind bars, but right now, all he could think about was keeping her alive. She murmured something barely audible, a name maybe, or a confession. He couldn't tell. They arrived at a private estate on the outskirts of town, one of his safe houses known only to a few. The guards rushed to open the doors, eyes wide when they saw who he carried. A cop. Their boss bringing in a cop. It didn't make sense. He ordered them out, voice like thunder, and carried her into the house himself. Inside, the marble floor turned red under his boots. He laid her on a leather couch, tearing off her blood-soaked shirt sleeve to find the wound. A gunshot, close range. His hands didn't shake, but something inside him did. He grabbed his phone and barked for a doctor. Not a hospital one, someone who owed him favors. Then he sat there, watching her chest rise and fall weakly, and for a second, he didn't see the badge or the enemy. He saw a woman who refused to die. When a doctor arrived, Alessandro didn't leave the room. He stood like a shadow behind him as the bullet was removed, his eyes never leaving her face. The doctor whispered that she might not make it through the night. That's when Alessandro's voice dropped low. Dangerous. She will, or you won't. Hours passed. The rain stopped. The city outside slept while inside that mansion, war brewed silently. Alessandro sat across from her unconscious form, whiskey untouched in his hand. His thoughts raced. Who would shoot her and leave her for dead? Why here, in his territory? If it was a setup, it was smart. Frame him for killing a cop and watch his empire burn. But something about it didn't fit. She wasn't chasing him tonight. She was running from something. Her phone buzzed weakly beside her blood-stained jacket. He picked it up. One message glowed on the screen. They know. Get out. His jaw tightened. They, whoever they were, they'd nearly killed a cop and dropped her in his street like a message. He leaned back, rubbing a hand over his face. He wasn't supposed to care. He didn't save cops. He buried them. But somehow this one was different. Maybe it was the fire he'd seen in her eyes when she'd faced him in interrogation rooms, unafraid. Maybe it was because she looked like someone who'd been betrayed by the same system he'd spent his life hating. By dawn, she stirred. Her breathing was shallow, her lips cracked, eyes flickering open just enough to see him. Her voice came out broken, whispering his name, not like an enemy, like someone clinging to the last thread of safety. He didn't answer. He just watched as she drifted back into unconsciousness. his chest tightening with something unfamiliar. The doctor returned with updates. She needed rest, antibiotics, time. Alessandro nodded, then told him to disappear, to forget he ever saw her. When the door closed, he stood alone again, the weight of her survival pressing on him like an anchor. Outside, one of his lieutenants approached cautiously, asking if he should handle the situation, meaning finish what the bullet started. Alessandro's stare cut sharper than a knife. He told him if anyone touched her, they'd join the bodies at the bottom of the river. The man left pale, realizing this wasn't just business anymore. As the sun crept through the curtains, Alessandro found himself sitting beside her again, studying her face, the faint freckles, the bruise along her jaw, the scar just below her collarbone. All marks of someone who'd seen too much. He wondered how many secrets she carried, how many enemies she'd made, and why fate had dumped her dying body right in front of his car. He reached for a cigarette, then stopped halfway. He didn't want the smoke to choke her. That thought alone startled him. Since when did he care who breathed near him, let alone a cop? But deep down, something shifted. This wasn't chance. Someone wanted her gone, and they wanted him blamed. He could almost feel it, like a trap tightening around both their necks. But if they thought Alessandro Romano would sit back and let someone else write his story, they were dead wrong. He looked down at her one more time, then whispered under his breath that she'd better wake up soon, because the city was about to burn for her. And when it did, everyone, from the police to the Mafia to the streets themselves, would know that the night a dying cop landed in a mobster's arms. Nothing in this city would ever be the same again. Aria woke to the faint echo of a heartbeat that wasn't hers. Slow, steady, powerful. Her chest ached, her throat burned, and every breath felt like a war between life and pain. The ceiling above her blurred and refocused as her body struggled to remember how to live. Then came the smell of smoke, not from fire, but from a cigar. Expensive, the kind only one man in this cursed city smoked. Her vision cleared just enough to catch the silhouette sitting across the room. Alessandro Romano. Her instinct screamed to reach for a gun, but her hand found nothing but bandages and weakness. Every nerve remembered who he was. The man she'd chased for 3 years, the monster behind every file her department had built. Yet there he was, alive, calm, watching her like a ghost that refused to leave. His eyes weren't mocking or cold this time. They were unreadable, heavy with something she couldn't place. She opened her mouth to speak, but the pain silenced her. He moved closer, his expression sharp, commanding her to stay still. She wanted to fight, to scream that he should have left her to die, but her body betrayed her. He handed her a glass of water, and even that simple act carried more intensity than 1,000 threats. Her fingers brushed his as she took it, and she felt the faint tremor beneath his control. When she finally spoke, her voice cracked like glass. She asked him why she was alive. He didn't answer. He just looked at her for a long moment, then turned his back and muttered something under his breath about her being found bleeding in his street. His, as if he owned the city and everyone crawling in it. Her mind raced, trying to piece it all together. The ambush, the message on her phone, the shadow that followed her car before it flipped near the bridge. She remembered the sound of gunfire, the sting in her shoulder, the black SUV that vanished into the night. It wasn't the Romano family. She knew their style, clean, quick, surgical. Whoever came after her wanted her to suffer first. She tried to sit up, and agony ripped through her chest. Alessandro's hand caught her shoulder, forcing her back down, the pressure firm but not cruel. His touch burned like fire. She could feel the conflict in him, an urge to protect clashing with a lifetime of blood-soaked instinct. He told her not to move, that she wasn't ready. His voice was low, dangerous, the kind that made grown men drop their weapons. But she didn't see a killer in that moment. She saw a man who didn't understand why he'd saved someone like her. The silence between them was alive, thick with tension neither wanted to name. Outside, she could hear the faint hum of engines, men patrolling the perimeter. His world, his rules. Her eyes flicked toward the door, already calculating escape routes, but he noticed instantly. That cold, Mafia precision snapped back into place as he warned her that if she tried to leave now, she'd be dead before she made it 10 steps. Not from him, from whoever had shot her. That's when the anger hit her. She'd spent years chasing this man through shadows, and now he was lecturing her about survival. But deep down, beneath the fury, she knew he was right. She wasn't just a cop anymore. She was a target. Alessandro turned to the window, watching his men move like ghosts through the courtyard. His empire had always thrived on control, on knowing every piece of the game. But this woman bleeding in his bed, hunted by someone other than him, had thrown the board off the table. He lit another cigar, his mind racing. Someone had made a move on his territory and used her as bait. That wasn't an attack. It was a declaration. He made a call, his tone low and lethal. Within minutes, his lieutenants arrived, grim-faced, waiting for orders. He didn't bother explaining who she was. He only said one thing: find a shooter. No questions, no excuses. If anyone in the city had information, they'd cough it up by nightfall or choke on it. Back in the room, Aria's pulse was climbing. She could hear his voice echoing through the hall, smooth and venomous, the kind that could make death sound like poetry. She hated that it unsettled her, hated that the man she'd sworn to destroy was now the one standing between her and another bullet. When he returned, she demanded answers again, this time with more force. He ignored the question and asked her one of his own. Who was she running from? She didn't respond. Years of training had taught her not to trust anyone, least of all a man like him. But when he leaned closer, his eyes burning into hers, she saw it, the flicker of truth. He didn't just want information. He wanted revenge. Whoever tried to kill her had crossed his line too. She told him only one thing, that the men who shot her weren't part of his network. They were federal, rogue agents, possibly, men who had infiltrated her task force and were cleaning house. She'd been digging too deep, getting too close to something buried beneath both the law and the underworld. Her voice trembled as she mentioned a name, Cobalt, and his reaction told her everything. He knew it. For the first time, his mask cracked. He clenched his jaw, muttering that Cobalt wasn't just a name, it was a code name. A ghost from the intelligence world, someone who played both sides for profit. A man without loyalty, capable of selling out the police, the Mafia, and even his own blood if it made him richer. Alessandro had thought Cobalt was dead. Apparently, he was wrong. Aria's breathing quickened as she realized the danger. Cobalt wasn't just after her. He was building something bigger, something that could wipe out both the Mafia hierarchy and what was left of the clean police force. She'd stumbled onto evidence linking his network to government funding, offshore accounts, and dirty assassinations masked as operations. And now she was the loose end. The Mafia boss and the cop locked eyes, both realizing the same truth. They were enemies on paper, but the same target in the dark. That night, the mansion became a fortress. Guards doubled. Phones were burned. Information moved through whispers instead of calls. Alessandro stood by the window, watching storm clouds swallow the city skyline. Every raindrop that hit the glass reminded him of the night he found her bleeding out. He'd seen hundreds of bodies before, men dying like dogs in the gutter, but none of them haunted him like that image. Maybe because saving her was the one thing he couldn't explain. Aria couldn't sleep. Every sound made her tense. Every creak in the hallway felt like danger closing in. But despite the chaos, part of her brain wouldn't stop replaying the moment he carried her through the rain. The warmth of his arm, the way he looked at her as if he didn't recognize himself. She hated that. Aria ran through the tunnel like a hunted animal, barefoot, bleeding, gasping for air as the echoes of gunfire above still rattled through her bones. The walls were slick with condensation and oil, the kind of hidden escape built for ghosts, not people. Her heartbeat was chaos in her chest. Every step she took away from that mansion felt like betrayal, like she was leaving him to die. Alessandro, the man she'd sworn to bring down, the man who'd saved her twice now. She didn't understand why it hurt this much to leave him. She reached the steel hatch that opened toward the river and shoved it hard. It didn't budge. Her shoulders screamed from the strain, her body trembling from blood loss. but she kept pushing until it gave way with a groan of rusted metal. Cold air slammed against her skin. The night smelled like rain and smoke. She climbed out, collapsed on the rocky bank, and turned back toward the mansion. In the distance, the hill glowed with flashes of light. Explosions, fire, chaos. She could see shadows moving in the windows. The fight wasn't over. Her instinct screamed to go back, but logic reminded her she was no good to anyone dead. She needed to move, regroup, find a way to get him out alive, if he was still alive. She staggered toward the old bridge nearby, clutching the key he'd given her like a lifeline. It had his initials engraved on it, AR. She didn't know what it opened, but she knew it mattered. Then she heard it, tires screeching, a black SUV tearing down the riverside road, headlights off, engine roaring like a predator. They followed her. Her pulse spiked, panic clawing through her veins. She darted toward the bridge, half running, half limping, and ducked behind the concrete barriers. The vehicle stopped. Doors opened. Heavy boots hit the gravel. Voices, low, sharp, professional. Not mobsters. These were military trained. Cobalt's elite. She recognized the tone, the cadence, the precision. These weren't men chasing a paycheck. They were executing an order. One of them spoke into a radio, saying they'd found her trail. Another cocked his weapon. Aria's body reacted before her mind did. She slid the small handgun Alessandro had shoved into her pocket from the mansion, chamber round, and waited. Her breath slowed, her senses sharpening through the fear. When the first silhouette came around the barrier, she fired. Once, twice. The man dropped, his partner shouted, and bullets ripped through the air. Sparks flew from the concrete near her head. She ducked low, rolled, fired again, catching another in the leg. Pain seared through her side. A bullet grazed her ribs, and she bit back a scream. Her vision blurred, but she didn't stop. She fired until the gun clicked empty, then dove into the river without hesitation. The icy water swallowed her whole, dragging her under with brutal force. She kicked, fought, surfaced for a gasp of air as bullets tore into the surface around her. She went under again, letting the current carry her away into darkness. When she finally crawled onto the far bank, coughing and shaking, she could still hear faint echoes of pursuit. She forced herself up, stumbled into the tree-line, and kept moving until her legs gave out. Her hand gripped the key again, tighter this time. If Alessandro had died, this key was all that remained of his protection. But deep down, something refused to believe he was gone. Men like him didn't die quietly. Back at the mansion, fire and gun smoke painted the night in chaos. Alessandro, blood splattered across his face, moved like a shadow through his ruined home. Every man who'd come for him was either down or running. He'd taken a bullet through the arm, another grazing his neck, but he barely felt it. All he cared about was whether she'd made it out. When the final intruder dropped, he ripped the mask off one of the fallen men and froze. Federal insignia. These weren't Cobalt's regular mercenaries. These were U.S. agents, rogue or otherwise, sent to tie up loose ends. And that meant Aria was right. She wasn't the only one they wanted gone. He called one of his surviving lieutenants, demanding status reports. The man stammered that the house was compromised, half the guards dead. Alessandro barked orders to clean up, burn everything, disappear for 72 hours. He couldn't risk another hit. Then he grabbed his coat, a new clip for his gun, and his car keys. He was going after her himself. Aria woke to a sharp pain in her shoulder. Dawn was breaking, and the sky glowed pale gray through the trees. She was in an abandoned shack by the riverbank. Wrapped in a torn blanket she must have grabbed subconsciously during her escape. Her body was shaking uncontrollably, fever rising, blood soaking through the bandages. But she couldn't stop thinking about him. Every echo of the gunfight replayed in her mind. Every shot, every scream, every memory of his hand on hers. Then she heard the crunch of tires outside. Her heart froze. She reached for the gun again. Empty. The door creaked open. A figure stepped inside. For a moment, she thought it was over. But when the light hit his face, she forgot how to breathe. Alessandro, bruised, burned, bleeding but alive. He looked at her like a man who had seen death and decided to walk back through it. His voice was hoarse when he told her the mansion was gone, that whoever came for them wouldn't stop until they were both buried. She wanted to yell at him for following her, but all that came out was a broken whisper. Why didn't you run? He just looked at her, eyes cold as steel but soft around the edges. He said he didn't save people for free. Then he held up the same key she was clutching and smirked. He told her it wasn't for a door. It was for a vault. His vault, a place even his enemies didn't know existed. And inside it, something that could destroy Cobalt completely. Arya didn't know if she could trust him, but she didn't have a choice anymore. The world she'd worked for, the justice she believed in, it was all rotting from the inside. And this man, this criminal, might be her only way to burn the corruption out. They left the shack before sunrise, moving through the forest toward the outskirts of the city. Every noise made her jump, but Alessandro was calm, methodical, eyes scanning every direction. He'd been hunted too many times not to know the rhythm of pursuit. When they reached a dirt road, an unmarked black car waited. One of his men stepped out, alive but shaken, saying they'd lost communication with the rest of the crew. The city was crawling with federal ghost teams. Arya climbed into the car, exhaustion sinking into her bones. Alessandro sat beside her, one hand still gripping his weapon. Neither spoke for a long time. The silence was heavy, charged with unspoken fear and something dangerously close to understanding. When they reached the outskirts of the industrial district, Alessandro guided the car into an abandoned warehouse. Beneath the cracked floor was an elevator no one would notice. He inserted the key into a concealed slot, and the metal doors opened. Inside the vault, the air was cold and sterile. Computers, files, evidence, enough to topple governments. Arya's eyes widened as she realized what she was looking at. Names, dates, transactions. Every dirty deal, every assassination, every bribe connected to Cobalt's operation and half the city's elite. She turned to him, stunned. He told her this was his insurance policy, that in his world, power wasn't money, it was leverage. But now that she was part of this, she couldn't go back to being a cop. Not after knowing what she knew. She stepped closer, anger flashing through her exhaustion. He'd been collecting evidence this whole time, blackmail, proof, manipulation, while people died in the streets because of it. He didn't deny it. He just said survival had a cost. But then his voice changed low, raw. He told her something she didn't expect, that he'd lost everything once too. Family, trust, love, and that the people behind Cobalt had been the ones to take it all. The police had turned a blind eye, and the system had protected them. That was when he stopped believing in heroes. For the first time, she saw the man beneath the empire, the fracture behind the fury. And in that moment, she realized something terrifying and beautiful. They weren't on opposite sides anymore. They were the same, broken, betrayed, and burning for justice no one else dared to seek. Then the lights in the vault flickered. The monitors glitched. A voice came through the speaker system. Smooth, calm, venomous. Cobalt. He told them it was too late. He'd already found them. And as the screens filled with security footage of armed men closing in on the warehouse, Alessandro turned to her, his eyes dark and defiant. He said one sentence that made her heart stop. Looks like you and I are either dying together or starting a war. The screens flickered again, static hissing like a warning before going dark. A heavy silence fell, broken only by the sound of boots echoing faintly above them. Arya's pulse roared in her ears. Alessandro moved first, pulling her behind a steel pillar as he loaded his gun with calm precision. His eyes were wild but focused, a man fully alive in chaos. He told her quietly that the elevator was compromised. They had one way out, the maintenance shaft leading to the old subway line beneath the vault. Arya's mind raced, torn between fear and adrenaline. She checked her weapon, knowing it wouldn't be enough against the army coming for them. She'd been a cop long enough to know what a trap sounded like. This was it. The explosion hit before they could move. The blast ripped through the vault doors, throwing them to the ground. Dust filled the air, alarms shrieked, metal screamed. Arya coughed, blinking through the haze, her shoulder slamming into Alessandro's as he shielded her from debris. Men poured in, masks, rifles, body armor. Cobalt's private unit. No insignias. No mercy. Alessandro fired first. Bullets tore through the smoke, each shot deliberate, surgical. Arya joined in, her police training kicking in through the panic. They moved as one, ducking, covering, countering. Every motion chaotic yet in sync, like they'd fought together for years instead of days. Bodies hit the floor, but more kept coming. They pushed toward the maintenance door, Alessandro yelling for her to grab the flash drive from the main console. She sprinted across the room, heart pounding, dove over a fallen body, ripped the drive from the system, sparks flying as the monitors blew out. She turned just in time to see Alessandro get hit. The bullet tore through his side, and he went down hard. Arya didn't think. She dragged him toward the shaft, gritting her teeth as bullets shredded the walls around them. Alessandro was still firing, blood dripping down his arm, jaw clenched in fury. They reached the maintenance door. Locked. He shoved his key, into the panel. It beeped once, and the door slid open. A rush of air hit them, the sound of underground tunnels roaring below. Arya half lifted, half pulled him inside. The door slammed shut behind them, sealing the chaos out for a heartbeat. Alessandro slumped against the wall, face pale but eyes burning. He told her to go, to take the drive and disappear. She shook her head violently, shouting that she wasn't leaving him. Not again. His hand reached up, brushed her cheek, leaving a streak of blood. He smiled faintly, that maddening, half-broken smile she hated and couldn't look away from. He whispered that she'd been his last mistake and his only redemption. Then the wall behind them exploded. The shock wave threw them apart. She hit the ground, ears ringing, dust choking her lungs. When she looked up, the tunnel was fire and smoke. The attackers had breached the vault wall from above. Shapes moved through the flames, rifles raised. Alessandro was still down, trying to reload. Arya grabbed his arm and fired wildly toward the light. One of the masked men fell, another followed, but there were too many. A grenade landed between them. Arya lunged, grabbing Alessandro, throwing both of them through the narrow opening of a service hatch as the blast tore through the shaft. They fell hard, sliding down a steep chute into freezing water below. The current dragged them fast, spinning them through darkness, debris crashing around them. Alessandro's hand found hers underwater, gripping tight, refusing to let go. When they surfaced, gasping, the night sky above the tunnel mouth was fractured with fire and sirens. Helicopters circled in the distance. They crawled out, soaked, half-conscious, into the ruins of an old bridge. Alessandro collapsed against the stone wall, coughing blood. Arya tore a strip of her shirt, pressing it against his wound. He told her not to waste her time. He was already dead. She refused to hear it, hands trembling as she tried to stop the bleeding. She told him he wasn't allowed to die, not after everything. He smiled again, eyes closing. For a moment, she thought he was gone. Then a sound cut through the air, a deep hum, mechanical and growing louder. A drone. She looked up, spotting the flashing red light as it hovered above them. A voice came through the speakers, cold and mocking. Cobalt again. He said it was over, that she'd made the same mistake as him, trusting a man who lived in the dark. Arya stood, fury and heartbreak twisting through her. She aimed the gun, firing at the drone until it crashed into the river. Then she turned back to Alessandro. His eyes were open now, watching her with quiet pride. He said she had the drive. That was all that mattered. That what was on it could burn the whole operation to ash. But she needed to finish it. Without him. She shook her head violently, tears cutting through the dirt on her face. He grabbed her wrist, weak but unrelenting, pulling her closer. He whispered something in her ear, an address, a name, someone she could trust, someone who would help her finish this. Then he let go. Arya pressed her forehead to his chest, sobbing silently as the sirens drew closer. She didn't know if they were cops or killers anymore. The world had blurred into one long nightmare. She stayed there until his breathing stopped. The river beside them flowed quietly, uncaring. When she finally rose, her hands were shaking, but her eyes were steady. She slipped the flash drive in her pocket, kissed his forehead once, and walked away into the dawn. She didn't look back. 2 weeks later, the world woke up to chaos. Leaked documents flooded every news outlet. Corruption, human trafficking, arms deals, blackmail connecting Cobalt's syndicate to politicians, law enforcement, even the Federal Bureau itself. The footage of the raid on Alessandro's mansion was everywhere, dozens of agents killed. The mansion burned to nothing. The media called it the fall of a criminal empire. But the truth was deeper. Arya stood on a rooftop in Rome, wind cutting through her jacket, watching the city glow beneath her. The world thought the Mafia boss was dead, but the fire hadn't gone out. Somewhere out there, new whispers were rising. His men were rebuilding under a new name, a cleaner one, and the one running it was her. She'd taken the drive, the power, the network, and turned it into something else. Justice, in her own twisted version of it. No badge, no laws, no chains, just results. But every night, when the city quieted, she still heard his voice, telling her that redemption always has a price, and that maybe, just maybe, the two of them hadn't really lost. They just started something no one could ever stop. Somewhere in the shadows, she could almost feel him watching. The ghost of a man who became her damnation and her salvation. And as the sirens of a new raid echoed in the distance, she smiled faintly. The war wasn't over. It had only changed sides. Justice wasn't clean anymore. It wore scars. It spoke in whispers. It walked in darkness, and sometimes it looked like love. The world learned that power built on fear burns fast. But power built on loyalty, sacrifice, watching from, and what time it is there. Share this fire and stay ready, because the next story will make your heart race faster than ever. Rico's hands trembled as he pressed the blood-soaked towel harder against her chest. The sirens wailed in the distance, but for once, he didn't care who was coming, police or paramedics. He had one focus, keeping her alive. Eva's breathing was ragged, her pulse fading beneath his fingers. She had been his enemy, a cop hunting his empire. But now, watching her fight to live, he realized she had become something else, something he couldn't afford to lose. He barked at his men to get the car ready, refusing to wait another second. When they hesitated, afraid of being caught helping a cop, Rico pulled his gun and fired into the air, screaming that anyone who hesitated again would join the bullet in the sky. They moved, fast. By the time they reached the private clinic on the outskirts of the city, Eva was unconscious. Rico carried her himself, ignoring the blood that soaked into his clothes. The doctor, a man who owed him more favors than he could count, froze when he saw the badge on Eva's uniform. Rico slammed him against the wall, his voice cold and final. Save her or die trying. Hours passed. Rico sat outside the operating room, blood drying on his hands, head pounding with questions he'd never thought he'd ask. Why had she been out there alone? Why did he even care? When the doctor finally emerged, Rico rose like a storm ready to break. The doctor said she'd live, but warned she needed rest, care, and peace. 3 things Rico's world had never known. He nodded, lighting a cigarette, exhaling smoke and fury as he muttered that she'd get whatever she needed if it meant keeping her alive. When Eva woke up, she panicked, hands reaching for her gun that wasn't there. Rico was already beside her, calm but unreadable. She tried to shout, but pain silenced her. He leaned closer, his tone low and dangerous, telling her to relax or he'd tie her down again. Her eyes burned with defiance, even through the pain, asking why he hadn't finished what fate started. Rico only smirked, saying he didn't save people, especially cops. But something about her made him break his own rules. He left her food, medicine, and silence, saying she could leave when she could walk. But she didn't. Days turned into weeks. Her body healed faster than her trust. She watched him move through his world of chaos with strange precision, ordering shipments, settling debts, punishing traitors. Yet, whenever his men brought in someone bleeding or broken, she saw something she never expected from a man like him. He turned away, almost disgusted by the violence he commanded. She began to understand that he wasn't born cruel. He was made that way. And that realization tore at her. One night, she caught him alone, staring at his reflection in the glass, whispering something she could barely hear. How every bullet he'd fired still echoed in his head. That night, she told him something she hadn't told anyone, that she hadn't been chasing him for fame or promotion. She had been chasing the people above him, the corrupt officers who used his empire to launder their own sins. Rico froze. His entire chest tightened as he realized what that meant. His enemies were not just on the streets, but in uniform. The next morning, two cars followed them. Bullets shattered the windows. Rico pushed Eva down, returning fire with brutal precision. They barely escaped alive. In that moment, everything changed. They were no longer hunter and hunted. They were both targets. Rico's fury burned hotter than ever. He gathered his men, ready to wipe out every traitor, police, or criminal who had tried to kill them. Eva begged him to wait, to think. But Rico didn't deal in patience. He stormed the warehouse where the ambush had been planned, dragging one of the corrupt officers out by the collar. The man begged, offering money, names, anything. Rico didn't blink. He handed the gun to Eva. She hesitated, hands shaking. He told her to pull the trigger if she wanted justice. Her eyes filled with tears. She dropped the gun, saying she wanted truth, not blood. Rico looked at her, jaw tight, then turned the gun on the man himself. One shot, one end. That was the moment Eva broke. She screamed at him, saying he'd never change, that no one could love a man who solved everything with violence. Rico's face didn't move, but his eyes told the story. He walked out, leaving her trembling in the shadows. For days, neither spoke. Rico drowned himself in work, violence, and silence. But when he heard she'd been taken, kidnapped by the same corrupt task force trying to erase evidence, something inside him snapped. He tore through every safe house, every informant, every dirty officer until he found her locked in a shipping container by the docks. She was barely conscious, bruised, and bleeding. Rico carried her out like she weighed nothing. When the task force arrived, led by the same police captain who'd ordered her disappearance, Rico didn't run. He stood there, Eva in his arms, as the captain shouted for his arrest. Rico told him to pull the trigger if he had the guts. The captain hesitated just long enough for Eva to whisper something to Rico. She told him to drop the gun, that she had recorded everything, the corruption, the orders, the proof. She pressed the small device into his hand before passing out again. Rico stared at it like it was a bomb. Then he smiled, a cold, dangerous smile. The next day, the recordings hit every major news outlet. The city erupted. Arrests swept through the department. The captain was stripped of his badge and thrown into the same prison he had filled with innocent names. Rico turned himself in, shocking everyone, including Eva. He told the court everything, from his empire to his enemies, and in exchange, he wanted only one thing, that Eva be left alone. The judge called it insanity, the media called it love, and Eva called it redemption. Months later, she visited him behind glass. He looked older, calmer, free in a way he'd never been outside those walls. She told him the department had rebuilt under new leadership and that she'd quit to start a clinic for survivors of violence, something inspired by the man she was supposed to hate. Rico smiled for the first time in years, saying she'd saved him long before he ever saved her. And as the guards led him away, Eva pressed her hand against the glass, whispering that some chains are worth carrying when they lead to freedom. In the end, love didn't save them in the way movies promise. It redeemed them in the way pain demands. She gave him peace. He gave her courage. Together, they broke the cycle of hate that had defined their worlds. Some enemies are destined to become each other's salvation. Sometimes the line between sinner and savior isn't drawn in blood, it's drawn in choice. Redemption doesn't erase the past. It redefines what you do with it. What did you think of this stories, our stories?